is we stop investigating.
Yes.
We fall out of right view automatically because we've collapsed the investigation. We said, oh, this person's beyond reproach. This person, we don't, and we can trust someone and still, it's like the CIA, in God we trust, in all else we investigate, right? In all else we look into it. And we don't need to worry about God. So all we need to do is keep investigating. So when I hear this, I see this as part of the problem. Would you say that I'm on the right track with what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
That one of the things that happened very early when I was actually in psychotherapy and psychology and all, I, like so many of the other students that I knew, we were all into commiserating about how hard it is to go into business. That everybody, that even though they've got a PhD in psychology, the easy way out is to go work for the government.
Okay.
And a great deal of it had to do with insurance. That in Michigan at the time they had Michigan Blue Cross, Blue Shield, and that the insurance companies would not pay for anything that was mental health.
Interesting.
That in fact they wanted medical procedures.
Right.
They wanted proof that what they were paying for had some value.
This is where we get the DSM.
That's exactly right. That's why the diagnostic codes were invented for psychotherapy as let us say, an answer to the insurance companies not wanting to pay for it.
Wow.
And that the diagnostic codes got more and more complicated, more and more sophisticated, trying to go down that rat hole of convincing the insurance companies that they were legitimate as far as health is mental health.
So can I ask your opinion on this real quick? Because when I hear you talk about that, one of the things that comes to my mind is what I've heard referred to as, within the setting of like a meditation instructor and a person learning instruction, is called scripting. So if I tell you that you're going to have a bad time before things better, it's highly likely you're going to have a bad time before things get better. When I hear about this big book of diagnostic codes and I think about the relationship and its intention of being therapeutic, which in my eyes now consists almost entirely of being able to engender non-discrimination.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like, for me to have a therapeutic outcome from psychotherapy, I need to be able to hold my experience without cutting it. And I shouldn't say I need, because I'm sure there are other possible therapeutic outcomes, but I envision, the outcome that I would desire would be to be able to hold whatever experience without wanting to cut it, without wanting to push some of it away and pull some of it closer. So when I have someone that I recognize the image or the sign of authority within, because it's vested upon them through the AMA, right? And they have this book, and they can say all day, I don't care, this is just for insurance. But when this is part of the script of the patient, funny that I said parent, of the patient provider interaction, I don't understand how it could possibly not influence the treatment. Does that make sense?
Well, it does influence it, but not quite in the way that you would think. And then, in fact, most of the time it backfires. And here's what I mean by that. Is that those diagnostic codes are not for the client. Those diagnostic codes are for the therapist and the psychiatrist, just like they are for the medical doctor. Okay. That the diagnostic codes often have fancy words, just like the body and the bones and all have very fancy words, femurs and all of that kind of language that nobody speaks.
Right.
All right. So if you tell the kid you've got a broken arm, That's all he needs to hear. He doesn't
Right.
need to know the technical definition of the which bone that was broken. He's going to have to wear a cast.
Right. Right.
All right. So let's get back then to the diagnostic codes.
Yeah.
Are often, and in fact, in almost every case that I have seen, the diagnostic codes that a person has about themselves that they were told by a psychologist actually is detrimental.
Yes. Right. That's what I
It
was. Yeah.
is detrimental in the way that, oh, this is who I am.
Right. Because they tack that on. They pick it up. They hold that,
Hmm. And
and they
it's
don't want to let it
certainly,
go.
in general, not true.
Right. Right.
uh, uh, ADHD, attention deficit disorder, any mind that is not trained
Yes. Is going
has
to.
an attention deficit disorder.
Yes.
Every kid has that.
When
But in,
I realized that, I laughed so hard because that was something that came up when in the course of talking about PTSD and ADHD and all of these so many words and terms and such. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, okay, this makes sense, I suppose. I look around and I see others and they do something different, and someone is telling me it's because of this. And when I actually learned from you how to train the mind, I was amazed at just just how quickly we buy those labels to cover up because we have ignorance. We don't know.
right, and then the label becomes an excuse.
Yeah, exactly. And it
Uh,
even becomes an excuse to not take the medicine. The real medicine, the actual learning how to see the mind
right,
medicine.
because they're relying upon the pills, which is not
Right.
medicine. It's
No.
a business transaction.
Yeah.
That often the medications that people are given don't do what they're prescribed for. And
No.
then they have side effects. And so people will wind up taking 5, 10, 20 different pills. Half of them are there interfering with the other pills that
Yeah.
didn't work in the first place.
Right. It's so wild. It's exactly like what the Buddha describes with a thicket of views, but we just we just removed
Yes.
the experiential portion somehow and just delved even deeper into the thicket of chemically reinforced views.
Okay. And then that perpetuates that relationship
Yeah.
of the therapist and the client. Now,
Right.
when I was in psychotherapy and figuring that out, you knew, or you probably had known by then, by the time that I got into the PhD program in psychotherapy, after having some courses and some training and that kind of stuff, and getting up there with them, I had a fallback
Okay.
in the sense that I already had a master's in electrical engineering.
Right. Okay.
And I recognized that I might eventually, as a psychologist or a psychotherapist, be able to make more money than I could as an electrical engineer. But I can
Hmm.
go make a high salary as an electrical engineer right now.
Right.
And so that's when I kind of made the decision that, uh, yeah, I'll finish the program, I'll finish the degree, but I'm not ever going to bother getting a license.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because those licensing, I mean, that's like getting a lawyer's license. You got to stand before the bar and all of that kind of stuff. It's very, very um, copycat like that.
Yes.
So this is when I ran across Muktananda. This was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which in those days was very, very progressive.
Right. Okay.
And so Muktananda had an ashram there, and I started to go. I hung out there. I parked my van in front of the place, and sometimes in really cold nights would come in. But then Muktananda himself shows up, and all of this guru worship, all this Indian stuff was there. And I kind of, with the background of psychology, started studying the situation from that perspective,
Yeah.
rather than the raw guru Sila kind of thing. And I did have a lot of respect for him. In fact, I had even more respect for him once I got to India, to his ashram in Ganeshpuri. But I could also see that he was just an ordinary human being that had gotten placed in the status of a guru, and
Okay.
that they were worshiping him for no good reason. This was actually my first great disappointment in India.
Yeah.
And so I began to go around looking for all of the great gurus.
Okay.
I spent quite a lot of time, about 5 or 6 months, at the Rajneesh or Osho place,
Uh-huh.
and became again quite disappointed.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
bet.
he was a good teacher in the sense of a good talker,
Uh-huh.
but he was dirty.
Oh, I'll
He
bet he's
raped
the
the
one that's not
female
here to.
women and had a fetish for Royals' voices and all kinds of stuff.
Yep, I
And
believe
not
it.
only and not only that, but I did some of the courses and things, and I had a session with one of the guys who was a hypnotist there,
Mm-hmm.
and I had hypnotist training in Detroit, and I was completely disappointed with this guy in the sense that he didn't know what he was talking about. He didn't know what he was doing. He was just there trying to make a buck to stay in Pune or Pune.
Gotcha, gotcha. That's pretty funny.
So I guess I was, too educated and too wise
Okay.
and too smart and too much of an investigator to
Okay.
actually put up with all of that Hindu stuff. So I went down
Right.
to Bangalore, and on the train to Bangalore, I met an Indian woman who spoke fairly good English, and she invited me to her home, having a meal. And while I was there with her, she
Yeah.
drug out an old um, newspaper that showed an expose that was page after page of hidden camera shots showing that Satya Sai Baba in Bangalore was a fraud.
Yes, I remember you telling me this story. I like this one.
All
Mm-hmm.
right, and so that's when I eventually got into Buddhism. Was
Yeah.
having all of these experiences of all of these frauds in the Hindu tradition.
Okay.
And now I see that the same thing is basically happening in Buddhism in the West, to where the monks that I met in Thailand were much more legitimate in the sense that they really, I mean, Ajahn Po really cared about me.
Yes.
He really, really cared about me. And that was the thing that was so amazing to me, that gave me so much, let us say, confidence.
Right.
But that's the difference is that it's I would say that it's something like closer to family rather than a teacher. That a teacher expects the student to always be a teacher, unless the teacher
Right.
is the teacher is always going to be the teacher, and the student is always going to be the student.
Right.
To where that generally, if we're lucky, that doesn't happen.
Right.
Eventually, the roles are reversed, and the student becomes the teacher of his old teacher. For instance, the guy who teaches algebra in high school, he has a few kids that are really, really interested in math, and he's a really good teacher for them. Then they go to the university, really get some math, and now they know a whole lot more math than their high school math teacher.
Right.
And so this is where the whole teaching of the Buddha comes in, is that we do not want the student to remain a student.
No, and this is really what the Mahayana tradition is trying to say as well when I hear them talk about it. When I hear them talk about Buddha nature.
Mm-hmm.
They're not
To go
talking
get
about
it.
turning into a superhero. They're saying that it's your job to continue to spread the light once you figure out how to look with it.
Mm-hmm. And so this is where that idea of the teacher training comes in,
Okay.
is that normally teacher training, in fact, it was almost a requirement that if you do teacher training on the internet, then that relationship is never going to change.
Right.
That the original teacher who sets up those courses is going to be seen and highly regarded as a great big teacher, and the students pay high dollars for the course, and yet they're not really trained as teachers.
Right.
They just listen to what the other teacher said about teaching, but they never get thrown into it. That was what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa did with me long before, well, at least months before I became a monk. He already had me teaching
Out at Watsu and Monk.
at Wat Suan Mo, just like the Buddha put that duty onto Ananda. He put that duty onto Sariputta, Mahamagala, and all of the other
Right.
monks. Is that now it's time for you to teach the Dhamma. There's also a sutta that says that there are 5 ways to learn the Dhamma, and the most important one is to become a teacher of the Dhamma.
Okay.
That first you listen to the teacher, then you learn the chanting, you mull that over, you talk with the other students and that kind of stuff. But then the way that you really learn the Dhamma is by teaching it.
Got it.
Because why? Because you're not just out on your own running your mouth the way that we would have it in the West, but rather that you're there being trained as a teacher by teaching in front of your elders.
In front of teaching. Yeah, in front of teachers.
Right.
Okay.
That's Bhikkhu Buddha. I remember that so well. I remember it was in the spiritual theater. I remember the crowd, and I remember that he and I were sitting there, me on a lower place, all dressed in white, and I was going to help him. He asked me to help him with the talk. That's what I was set up for. Now, the talk he's going to give is on the Four Noble Truths, and he starts it off, and I explain what he just said and turn back to him, and he says, "You take it from here." And there I was with Achan Po, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, and all of these monks and Thai people and a whole bunch of Westerners were there, and he put me on the spot. In later times, Achan Po would put me on the spot like that, but I was ready for it. I mean, that first time was enough.
Yeah.
And so when Achan Po asked me to give a talk on the 7 factors of enlightenment at a retreat that I was visiting, I was ready to go. And in fact, to be honest with you, he said that in the evening for a talk that was going to be done at 7:30 in the morning, and I just happened to have had the Majjhima Nikaya with me, and that was the night that I basically memorized the Anapanasati Sutta. So that I could give that talk on the relationship of the practice, and the culmination of the practice is then the enlightened factors grow.
Right.
So this is the whole style of the teacher training, is that it has to be done in a way where the teachers are actually trained. Now, I can go back to my childhood when I was living in South Carolina. There was a school called Winthrop Training College.
Okay.
And that this was what, I don't know how many schools like that were around, or how many were in South Carolina, how many states have these kind of schools. But I do know that it didn't last long. That something happened in the sense that a teacher doesn't get teacher training so much as they get a lot of classroom and a lot of psychology. But at Winthrop Training School, the students did all of the teaching, like for the first grade, but they had first grade teachers in the classroom with them. And so the students would do the teaching, but the old masters were standing right there.
Right.
And that meant that you have to be on your toes. You can't respond to the kids the way you want to in your heart. You got to respond to them correctly because the teacher is standing right there.
Right.
So
Right.
this is the
Okay.
kind of thing that we need to do in a teacher training program. And obviously, the easy way to do it, I mean, the Open Sangha Foundation is not going to actually do that kind of thing, but what we can do is set this up
Right.
so that if people want to become, let us say, dedicate their lives to the Dhamma, whether they're going to be a layman or a monk
Hmm.
or a nun, but almost always what you hear is that, oh, I want to be a teacher. I want to
Right.
be a Dhamma teacher.
Right.
And then with that, it goes back to the old Western idea of, well, you gotta eat, so you gotta work to eat. And so they
Mhm.
begin to mix those two together, charging these high prices for
Right.
the Dhamma, and even higher prices to do a teacher training program to where the teachers are not trained in that program.
Right.
The, the right way to do it is to help these students who are coming to Open Sangha Foundation with that kind of point of view and help them get into a Wat where they will have an abbot that's been a monk for 20 years who is really going to be doing the training. That is in fact what's happened to Kat here on the island. He's at Wat Rusi Pa Siang Tang, and that the abbot there is
Mhm.
marvelous. Well, I kind of figured he would be marvelous anyway, but he's marvelous in the sense that Kat can see that this guy has something. One of the things that Kat has said was is that um, Ajahn Maitri doesn't have any problems of his own, so he's there to help the people who come to the Wat with their problems.
Mhm.
And that I assume that if Kat stays there for a few months, he's going to be put into the teacher's position.
Yeah.
Ajahn Maitri is going to say, "You take it from here, Kat." And Kat's going to say, "I'm done, done, done." The first time it happens, but then
Yeah.
he'll make it through,
Right.
and that this is the way that teachers are trained. And I can see that in the West, that because of the language problem, that the Thai monks who come to the West are there for the Thai people, and they don't care whether the monk learns English or not.
Right.
It is not that big a deal because they come to teach to the Wat for the Thai language anyway.
Right.
So I would imagine that if you had, let us say, just somewhat as an example, the abbot of that Wat would be very kindly looking towards a Westerner who would come hang out,
Yep.
maybe move in,
Yep.
and pretty soon we're going to set up a meditation class once a week so that the Westerner can start teaching the Dhamma to the community.
Very nice.
And then maybe after a few months, we'll do a weekend retreat or two.
Right.
And so this is the way that we would get it started as sort of a grassroots level. But
Okay.
the point is that you can't take a teacher's training program and then start teaching the Dhamma if the training program is not set up correctly.
Right.
And paying money for it means that the teacher cannot teach generosity because he's charging you money for what he's given you. This is a business deal. That in
Right.
order to teach generosity, you have to be generous to people.
Yes.
That's how we teach generosity is by being generous. And
Mm.
so this moving into the Wat, the like the example with Cat here on the island is that he is extraordinarily in a state of gratitude for the generosity that he's getting from the abbot.
Mhm.
That Pedro is thinking about doing this, and one of the things that Cat said to Pedro is that once you move into a Wat, you don't need money because the Thai people are going to take care of your bodily needs, and
Wow.
you've got housing, and you've
Yep.
got a master teacher there.
Yep.
Now, one of the things that's really amazing is that in order to be an abbot of a Wat in Thailand, the monk has to have been a monk for 20 years.
Okay.
That means that he was in training as a teacher for 20 years.
Yep.
That
Wow.
in fact the label of Achan doesn't come until one's been a monk for 10 years, and the word Achan then means that he's ready to start teaching. Why?
Okay.
Because he's been thrown into the teaching over and over again. Though
Right.
many monks they don't do that. I've seen, uh, well, mostly Westerners who have been too shy to allow themselves to be put into the teacher's position. And
Interesting.
in fact, I've seen one guy like that he would avoid Achan Po at all costs because he knew that if he hung around Achan Po is going to put him to work. Dhamma work.
Gotcha.
So, any teacher program that we're talking about setting up with OSF is not going to be the school itself. It's much more like going to be the HR department of a university.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, to get people connected together. That's what the whole point about the Open Sangha Foundation is to communicate so that people can find teachers, students can find other students to make friends with, that
Right.
the students can find Watts to go to. This is why Kat and Pedro both are doing so much work of getting the names of Watts. We've gotten more than about 300
Yeah.
so that people can get in touch with these places.
Mm-hmm.
Go visit them. That's one of the reasons to have the Google Maps, is so you can say, oh, well, there's a Watt only about a 20-minute drive from here.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
And so getting people involved with real Dhamma people rather than the Westerners who are out making it a business. That's the danger of Western Buddhism is it's fallen into a business model, which means that it's just another kind of psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm. Samsara
And
light.
right, exactly so.
Like, just let me stay a slave, but make it comfortable.
Hmm.
Which is sad, but it's
Rather
also
than,
fun.
but an example then would be the difference between a mommy and a daddy is that the mommy wants the child to be a child and to be her son or her daughter for their whole lives.
Yeah.
To where dad is saying things more like, grow up and be a man.
Yeah, right.
All right. So this is the kind of relationship that we need. We don't want to keep a client a client. We want them to come up to the level of the teacher himself. And this is where the
Right.
word Kaliyametta or Kaliyamita comes
Mm-hmm.
in,
Mm-hmm.
that we become spiritual
Spiritual.
friends. I don't
Yeah.
have Achan Po up on the pedestal anymore. I know his foibles. I know Bhikkhu Buddhadasa's foibles. That
Mm-hmm.
he's a human being. He just
Right.
happens to be an extraordinary, happily human being. And they can manage things just quite well.
Yeah.
But within the guru has to hide all of his faults because he
Right.
doesn't want to disappoint all of the wannabes.
But we already know from the Anapanasati Sutta that this is not, like you said, it's not. When Anapanasati is practiced fully and continuously, as in we don't stop it,
Mm-hmm.
we see, you know what I mean, clearly there's no end to a painful feeling arising. Painful feelings still arise even in the Arhat. They simply know that their next step is to breathe in and out, calming the painful feeling, rather
Mm-hmm.
than acting out like a monster man.
Precisely so.
Okay.
And not only that, but that whole idea of friendship
Yeah.
means that it's a continuing, ongoing kind of thing. But
Mhm.
one of the things that you can see within the model of the psychotherapy, and I see this with Buddhism in the West also,
Mhm.
is that we come, we pay, we
Yeah.
expect to get results,
Right.
and then the business deal is over,
Yup.
This is exactly what happens with retreats, in the sense
Yep.
that there is no relationship much with the teacher, not a real relationship. I mean, a how to do and maybe an hour or so
Yeah.
before they have the retreat. And then they have only a few minutes a day with the teacher. If they're lucky, they get 15 minutes. Normally, they get 15 minutes with another student.
Right.
And, and then they pay for the course. And then when the course is over, they leave.
Yeah.
The 10-day retreat is over. The
Never.
business
Never.
deal is finished. There's
Right.
nothing left to it.
Any enduring relationship is the relationship of a repeat customer.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
That businesses know that. That
Mhm.
Kleenex wouldn't sell a lot of Kleenexes if they only sold one box of Kleenex to the customer. No,
Yes.
they want them to buy a box of Kleenex every week.
Hmm.
So this is the whole idea of that repetitive business or that repetitive practice of we leave the world, we go to the what, so that we can spend the time that it takes to practice
Right.
over and over and over and over again. Why? Because we've got two major problems. One is that we're fighting with both the DNA that we were born with,
Yeah.
the instinct, which is
Hmm.
a self-preservation instinct, basically. And
Hmm.
so, in our society, almost everything that happens becomes a survival issue.
Right.
I remember a seventh grade spelling test became a survival issue for me. Having bullies walk down the hall is a survival issue. And
Yeah.
that's
Right.
because of our DNA. But
Hmm.
the worst part of it is that the society, then everybody in the society is in that survival mode.
Right.
And so that's propagated in the form of education, which
Yeah.
goes with the instincts. And
Hmm.
so we live a life of instinct, and that the education that we get is from other people who live instinctively.
Yes.
And so here's all of that deep training for our whole lives, being trained by instinctive people.
Hmm.
And also, we've got our own instincts. And so to come out of that requires practice.
A lot.
Well, not a lot, but right now it does.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
The
This makes.
practice right now, the point I guess that you're making is that there's a lot of right nows.
Yes. Right. They continue to come one by one.
Yeah, one by one,
Yes. Uh,
about the time that a clock ticks.
hmm.
There's a new
Something like
now.
right. Yeah.
And so
Interesting.
that's the time to practice again is right now, to come out of our instincts, to come out of our survival mode, to come out of our territorial mode, to come
Yeah.
out of our materialism mode, to come out of our going along to getting along mode coming from the
Hmm.
herding instinct. You got to
Hmm.
be part of the herd to survive. No, you don't.
No. Mm-mm.
And yet we're trained that way. And the way that we're trained in our society is oh, you gotta eat, so you gotta work. You gotta work to eat.
Yeah.
And yet I know millions of people on the planet Earth, literally millions of people who do not work and they eat.
Hmm.
A good example of that would be Donald Trump. He doesn't work, he
No.
frets.
Yep.
Okay, that wealthy people, they don't work, but they
No.
eat.
Hmm.
Um, Politicians, they don't work, but they eat.
Yeah, it's really hard. You see this. You see this idea mirrored all over the place in society that, and it's this idea of. I have a feeling it comes from Protestantism. It has to do with delayed gratification and the idea that we're not there yet, and the idea that it's it's idapakachayata, but it's wrong. Does that make sense? It's from the wrong perspective.
It
It's
is.
it's like the idea that what do we call it? There's words for it in the Western language. When you see Donald Trump and he has money the fact that he has money confers upon him the idea that he deserves to have that money. It's a very circular logic. Does that make sense? Like a lot of people look at
Oh,
rich
yes.
and they think
Feudal,
that because they're rich, they deserve their riches.
right.
And
One of the words that is there
yeah.
is nepotism.
Yes, right. Things like this. Yes,
That
right.
my
Blood
dad
money.
was a carpenter, I got to be a
Yep.
carpenter. Well, in my case,
Right.
my dad was a pipe fitter,
Uh-huh.
as one thing, and a meter reader, and also a furnace installer. Well,
Yep.
because he was a furnace installer, that's where I got my first transformer. And
Uh-huh.
off I go into electrical because he was very much involved with the electrical stuff, wiring houses for thermostats and all of that kind of stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
we do basically live in a nepotistic world,
Right.
and that politics is one of those, and big money is another one. Teachers, how about cops?
Yep.
Yeah, cops have families of cops.
Yep.
My grandfather was a
Oh,
cop, kind of thing. That's
right.
so.
Yeah.
We do what we know, which
The
means that we
military.
do what we're trained to do, and what we're trained to do
Yeah.
is by people who were ignorantly trained, also going way back into the past,
Way back. Yes, right. And it makes no sense
way
to
way
you.
back. Um, and so and one of the things then we can say that we can do is to come out of that instinctively herding, that we do what we're told to do in order to stay in the herd.
Right.
And this is one of the reasons why Westerners have so much trouble with their families to go off to Thailand to become a monk, where in
Mm-hmm.
Thailand the kids are pushed into it.
Right. Right.
And it's from the same perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And
Interesting.
that is, oh, don't go do something that we don't know how to do. You got to go do something we know all about.
Right.
That the parents are uncomfortable when their child takes on something that they don't understand.
Correct.
So that's part of that herding instinct, which means now that instinct that we're born with and raised with, that raising then makes it even more pressurized.
Right.
And so this is why we have to
But that's
remember
the
to
conditioning.
practice right now, because those instincts and those old memories of all that we've been trained
Yeah.
keep coming right back up to the surface over and over again. And so we have to remember to be here now. We have to
Yeah.
remember that this present moment is all that we really have, and
Yeah.
that we can then, when we get fairly good at that, we can start communicating that to other people, to our friends. This is where that the teacher role comes in. But a teacher role is not going to be a teacher role for long. What we're really teaching is friendship.
Right.
And so the teacher is not necessarily such a teacher, he's a friend.
Right.
And yet in our system, it's always been separated. The example that I'd use here now is in military situations.
Yeah.
It's always the aristocracy who
Yeah.
put on the armor because they can afford it. They
Right.
become the centurions. They become the officers.
Yep. Officer,
And so
overseer.
the overseers, the officers of the troops. And the
Yep.
troops, the one who have the grunts, are the ones who have to do all the work.
Yep. Yep.
An example of that then would be that the ship's captain, he doesn't work.
No.
He's got the boilermakers, he's got the gunners, he's got um, the deckhands and all of that, and they're the ones who do the work of the ship.
Right.
But the admiral, he's got nothing to do except stand around making sure that everybody else is working.
Mm-hmm.
So this two-tiered system of officers and enlisted, in fact, they don't enlist often, they're drafted.
Right.
But if they
Well, if
keep
they
that
condition you
two-tiered
well in
system,
Dhammarato, you just run right to them. They got me good this time around that way.
yes, I know.
I look back at my family like you were talking about with nepotism, and I see, on my mother and my father's side back 4 or 5 generations, as far back as I figured to look. And I didn't even bother. My wife did the whole genealogy thing a while back and started telling me about it. But when she did, she's, oh, look at that. How familiar.
Mm-hmm.
All of them, all the way back, either Army or Marine Corps. And
Okay.
so, it's very plain for me to see that they just load you up right out of the gate and shoot you with a cannon, or shoot you out of a cannon. They don't even know they're doing it,
Mm-hmm.
That
Right.
just happens.
And so there you go with that two-tiered system.
Yeah.
America experimented for a while with a three-tiered system in the sense of the working class, the middle class, which is just more wealthy lower class, and then the upper class.
Right.
And that upper class then is the idea of the teacher versus the student. It's a divisional system.
Right.
Mother and child, boss, employee, officer,
Yeah.
grunt. All
And
of that is a two-tiered system. And in Buddhism in the West, that system remains. The teacher and the student, the doctor and the patient,
yeah.
the psychotherapist and the client, the
Right.
politician and the voter. It's all this duality that is built into our system. And what we need to come back to is the integration of those two. And this is where the Kalyametta concept comes in, is that when someone is new to Buddhism, the teacher's job is to bring that student up to his level.
Right. Because
rather than keep him one down.
Right.
This is one example of that would be when Buddhadasa was getting really old, he would talk about everybody be a Buddhadasa.
Oh.
Your job is to be a Buddhadasa. Don't go suck up to Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. Be one.
Be him.
Be him. We come out of that one down position.
Yeah.
Become your own boss. Be on top of the world. Well,
right.
How can that be taught by someone who wants himself to be on top of your world?
Right. It can't. It's not possible.
So this is where real teacher training is the real teacher training is the training for the teacher to depart to the student, that the student is really a teacher. He's really going to become as high as he thinks his guru is. Yeah. Now, in one of the disadvantages that our culture has is that we take and place people at very, very high levels, like they're very special.
Right.
That guru thing, it comes, I think, out of Christianity, that Jesus himself had a lot of good advice, but he made some mistakes.
You know what?
He wasn't perfect, but by the time we hear about him later, he's a god.
Right.
They take him and throw him way high up in the air.
Mm-hmm. And then nobody can ever get near him again.
And then nobody can get near that again.
But
and
you know what?
That
I remember in the Bible, I remember them saying to Jesus, I don't remember which of his two it was, but they were asking him, hey, which one of us can get it with you in heaven? Like which one of us is going to sit by you? And he immediately got down and he began to wash their feet. And he washed their feet and washed their feet and washed it. And they were like, what are you doing? He's like, that's not how it works. He's like, you're not, he just washed their feet instead of saying like, oh yeah, you'll be elevated to where I'm at. And I always thought
he's trying to point to them is that he's already down to their level.
Right. That they're already all sitting right there together.
Mm-hmm. And so this idea of elevating the teacher and having great respect for the teacher is the problem. Rather than recognizing, oh, this teacher has something marvelous to offer, let's take it.
Yeah.
This is the idea then of that mural that's on the side of the building there at Watsu and Milk, that is in
the eye of the Dhamma.
Egyptian. Right, the eye of the Dhamma. That one guy is sitting there with a basket full of eyes, but he's giving them away. And so you have one guy who is bowing in gratitude. Thank you, I've got the eye. Another
Right.
one is screwing the eye on,
Yeah.
making sure that it's working. A third guy is just receiving his eye. And then up in the top corner, you have a whole mass of stick figures running away.
Yeah. They don't want.
Why are they running away? Is because they don't see themselves
Yep.
as one with a Dhamma eye.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking about this earlier today when I was thinking about.
Hang on, Keyshawn is calling. I'm going to bring
Oh,
him in.
okay.
Hey,
Hey,
Dhammarato.
what's going on?
Hello. I'm on the phone with Alex now. I've been waiting for you to call. I thought that you would. You're pretty late. Anyway, we're in the process or just about to finish up with the idea of what a teacher's job in the Dhamma is to bring the student out of the position of being a student into becoming his own guru, to be his own star. And this is what real teacher training is to teach the student how to be his own guru, how to be his own boss, how to not need another teacher. So anyway, good to see you, Keyshawn.
Good to see you too, Dhammarato.
We've been talking about teachers for about an hour now. Why don't we finish this call? You guys stay on and we'll just finish the call and we'll turn the recording off.
Sounds
Okay.
Because I think that we've gotten it pretty well positioned that the job of OSF is not to train teachers, but to connect them with people who would be a good teacher for them so that they can move into the Wat, gain the experience of the abbot of the Wat, and then the abbot is soon going to be putting the teacher or the new student in the teacher's position. You've already seen that happen with you, haven't you, Keyshawn? That when you were going to the Wat, they were beginning to give you responsibility. Oh, why don't you teach English to the monks?
Mm-hmm.
That would be an excellent thing because then you're spending your time with the monks, and while you're teaching them English, they're teaching you happiness.
That's a
Yeah.
good trade.
All right, so let's finish this call. Hang on there with it, and we'll turn the recorder off.